You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronise.
Welcome. It's our festive holiday show. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. I'm feeling very festive. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I love to eat and I love everything about the holidays. But today we're going to talk about some things that help us manage this time a little bit better.
Yes.
So how have you been?
I've been great. I really love this time of year. I'm really excited that this is the week of Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays of the year. So I'm happy.
So what's your favorite part of Thanksgiving?
Well, I've always loved it because, you get in the middle of your life and you get busy and stressed and all this stuff happens. But I love Thanksgiving because really the whole point is not the food, although it really does end up sounding like it's all about the food. But the whole point really is to take a moment, and at least for me, this is the point, to take a moment and to think about what you're grateful for and to really have a moment of gratitude. And I feel like this year is even more significant for me because about 2 weeks ago, I lost one of my closest friends to cancer. And it really jolted me this time because I guess I've lost a lot of people in my life, but this one was a very, very dear friend. Like, we were so close and connected, and I've been devastated. And it jolted me fortunately, it jolted me into the direction of really feeling gratitude and really, appreciating my children and my family and you. And it just kind of stopped me. So I think I'm going to honor Susan this Thanksgiving and really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think with gratitude, one of the things that we often don't do is consider, and I think I first heard this from Anthony Robbins, but our worst day is somebody's dream life. And that doesn't mean that we don't have issues and problems and concerns. Everybody does. But often we sort of exaggerate the misery and, of course, the positive stuff too. We tend to exaggerate in both directions. And, relating that gratitude to those serious conditions, like compared to what? We always say compared to what, but relating that to food and relating that to someone who's trying to make a big change in their lives and thinking that somehow missing out on this meal or this food or that food is that significant in the big scheme of things.
Right.
I think that we overly emphasize sometimes those simple things and make them far more dramatic than they really need to be.
Absolutely. And I think, we always talk about this. And I think, when you discuss with our clients and you talk all the time about how important it is to be a lighthouse, not a tugboat when it comes to this kind of social eating and transformation, lifestyle transformation. And I think that's such a beautiful concept that you emulate really well. And so I would love for you to explain that.
Yeah, thanks. The idea of being a lighthouse and not a tugboat it's actually pretty timely in many things, not just food and diet. People with religion, politics. There's a lot of people out there that want to constantly change the people around them and want to constantly, lecture or instruct, etc., which is really great if somebody wants it. But change is hard. And often, especially with food, change goes against social norms, and it's whether these social norms are healthy or unhealthy. And so, like in Lighthouse, if you do this as a solo activity, I think you're much more likely to succeed. Because if you think about making that change and maybe what you've done to research that change, what you've done to prepare for that change, what you've done to create the commitment for that change, the idea or notion that you're going to follow through with it and you're going to bring along with you your friends and family who may or may not have thought about it or may not even want to make the change is at best a lofty goal and at worst probably a little bit delusional. You know, it's the less people you involve, and I know this is counter to what a lot of people think, but it's what we teach. The less people you involve in this, paradoxically, the better off you are. So I think that the goal for change is to pick your direction and then stick to it. And it should seem obvious. Well, it may not be obvious, but if you think about it or reflect on it, it might be obvious that a lot of your good or bad habits originated or at least are propped up by those people closest to you. And when you initiate this change, an unintended message that you might be sending out to the people around you is that they're, of course, wrong or they're misguided in their diet choices. Now, you may not think that, but it may be a message that's coming through. And so it can often be implied. And it might happen even if you don't care what the people around you eat. I mean, you saw this when you were trying to make your changes in general, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
This happens all the time. I've seen it myself. I've seen this with so many people around me. But it may not seem obvious until you go through it and you realize that the less you say, sometimes the more powerful it can be, especially when you're having a positive outcome. And, you know, you'll notice that people start asking a lot more questions and people suddenly become more interested. But what really, really makes the difference and what you see over the long haul, I think it's the long haul, is that people will end up kind of following along ultimately, you know, because they see how you're feeling and how you've accomplished all these different things and you got off your medication, whatever it is. So it is really helpful and empowering for you to think that you don't need to explain, you don't need to have people tugging along with you. You just need to be that light.
Right. And what we really want people to do is just do your own thing.
Yeah.
Just sort of do your own thing.
Take care of yourself.
And most importantly, we want you to develop the short-term grit and commitment so that the long-term food habits become effortless and automatic. And that doesn't mean that every single meal is going to be perfect. But what it does mean is that you decide a framework or a time period that you're going to make a change and sort of stick to it. And why this is important, I think, for today's show, and how have you seen over the decades as a personal trainer, as a dietitian, how have you seen people be successful in getting through the holidays, and what's some of the best advice you've collected?
Yeah, so I'm the nutrition columnist for Veg News Magazine. So every year for the holiday edition, it's how do you get through the holidays? And yes, and I get all these interviews that's all about how do you deal with all the stress of the holidays? And there's always different angles for it. But I think the most important thing, the key to success, is mindfulness. You know, instead of dreading the holidays and, you know, worrying about, this meal and this person and that person, and, you know, or the flip side of that, of beating yourself up, you know, the day after about how much pie you had at the celebration. Instead, plan. I mean, these are the quintessential rare and appropriates. We talk about this throughout the year, but these are some of the most beautiful celebrations for some people, not for everyone. But there are a lot of these beautiful traditions and celebrations and gatherings that this is the time to enjoy these special events. And so, you know, I've practiced and I've taught about mindfulness when it comes to food, and it makes that meal, that experience so much more impactful, and, you know, you can't regret it when you're really enjoying it. So, you know, you plan ahead, you know, this is going to be the meal, you know, and so you're there and you collect your favorite food on your plate. You brought some, or you know what you're going to have, what to expect. Make your perfect plate. Everything you've fantasized about or wanted, or your favorite foods, whatever it is, make your perfect plate and enjoy putting it on the plate. Sit down, look at everyone around you, even if it's just your dog or whoever you're with. Notice everyone around you. Listen to the sounds. If there's music playing, if there's voices talking, whatever it is, like notice the sounds, notice the smells, like some of those smells that just remind you of traditions and stuff you've done throughout the years. And then, take that bite, that first bite, that's always the best bite, right? The first one. Take that bite and really taste the food in your mouth and chew your food, really chew every bite.
I was about to say, I think the last bite is good too, because I'm a gulper, but I think you're exactly right. This is true, and it's important to really enjoy it. And at the same time, I think you're also saying that this mindfulness isn't just about necessarily the meal, but if you happen to be one of our clients, and we have several that are in the process of the change or the transformation, now might not be the time for the rare and appropriate. And remember, we define rare and appropriate as people and places, not time between events. So for sure, visiting family, having a celebration like Thanksgiving might be the right place, but when's the right time?
Right. So so if it is not that time for you, because we could talk about that in a different framework, like what do you do when you are
right
not doing a rare and appropriate? But if you are, and if you're not going through some major transformation right now, you're just sticking to your health span diet, you're just eating your healthy, this is your life, here is a perfect opportunity for that rare and appropriate. And that said, include that and then plan around it. So just because you have this incredible experience, this wonderful one meal, that doesn't mean that from then until your New Year's resolutions, it doesn't matter anymore because screw it, I'm just going to start a New Year's like everyone else does. No, go back to your routine right afterwards. That's it. Enjoy it so that the next day you're like, okay, going right back to what you did. If you're doing time restricted feeding, then you have the morning, whatever. Do what you do you. And don't get sucked into that rabbit hole of screw it, I already messed up, because it's not a mess up. It was your rare and appropriate. And I think that's a lesson for anyone in rare and appropriates throughout the year, but particularly now where there's so many opportunities, pick and choose wisely what really matters to you.
Right. And it makes perfect sense that you have to have that balance. And I think balance is not necessarily moderation. Balance is about deciding what you want to deviate on, whatever that thing may be.
Yeah, strategically, not just like, whatever happens,
and
happens.
Tactically.
Very tactically, yes.
Tactically and strategic. So you are thinking ahead and saying, okay, is this really something I want to do? This is the unplanned office party for those of our listeners that are in the office grind. And a lot of times these events become everybody had to bring something. What are you bringing? What are you bringing? They had to bring something. It's not that everybody has their most amazing dish and it's this incredible celebration. It was that somebody decided to have this office feast and then hoisted upon you this responsibility and obligation to have something. And you forgot because you were late to the kids' game last night. And so now you rush out this morning and wait for the grocery store to open so that you can get that thing that you can just, like, I will need to get my checkbox. And then it all ends up on the conference room table. And honestly, it's not only not that healthy, it probably doesn't taste that good.
It's just not worth it.
And is this the time to do it,
Right.
right? It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are you need to plan and know. And know, even in the moment, you'll know if it's something that you want to consider in that. And speaking of which, you can make something that matters to you if it does matter. And speaking of cooking, I always, I laugh and joke about my first impression of you before I knew you, and and hearing you on a couple podcasts talking about being, like I thought of you as the cold, starving, miserable person after listening to you. And I laugh about it now because it turns out that you really do love food and you really love cooking. And I love that you love to cook for me because I feel like the lucky recipient of that. So how would you translate that to the
Well,
holidays.
I think it translates perfectly. I believe that one of the false impressions is that you have to be extreme all the time, that you have to be on guard on all the time, that you have to always be watching what you're eating. And when we talked about it just a minute ago, when I talked about that, developing those good habits really make it effortless later, make it automatic later. And I really love to cook. I mean, I really, really love to cook. I grew up with vegetables and fruits. I always was around them. I spent the first half of my childhood on a family produce farm, and from planting to harvest and my grandmother canning, we grew a large percentage of the vegetables and fruits we ate. I mean, we had watermelons, we had strawberry patches, we had sweet potatoes and peppers and tomatoes, all this great produce. So I grew up with a grandmother and a mother that was cooking often. So eating out was rare. And even on my father's side, my grandmother on my father's side, amazing Italian. She lived in the inner city Baltimore neighborhood, and always had a refrigerator full of fruit, always had mostly home-cooked meals. Even though they had row homes, there were small gardens beside the house, and out in the little yard, there was a small little yard with an electric lawnmower. I remember that. We'd plug it in. But there was squash and peppers and tomatoes all growing in those gardens. So we even had fresh grown things there. Now, she had the tin with about a half gallon or whatever of olive oil as a good Italian grandmother sitting next to the stove. But whether she was cooking the big lasagna meals and the amazing Italian feasts that we would have on Sundays, these enormous multi-entree meals, but it didn't matter if it was pork chops or pasta, almost all of the food we ate was cooked there. And so I was around that constantly, cooking. And we would occasionally go out to eat. And it's really interesting. I've talked to my mother about this too, but even on my grandmother's side, we would go to a place called Gino's. And Gino's was a sub place, which is really funny. So we go to a sub place. We would have Chinese food. We'd go out for Chinese food occasionally. And then even our seafood, because my father's side family were big fishermen and crabbers. And so in Maryland, you would have these big crab feasts, and they call them oyster roasts. So these would be sort of summer events or fall events where you go out and have these, amazing spread of steamed crabs. And we've talked about our Krabby Chef soup. It's sort of a homage to that whole time in my life. But even when we bought crabs and fish and brought it home from the market, most of it was still cooked at home. We didn't go out for seafood ever. And it really, for me, wasn't until college, and then later when I was working at NASA for the lunch group, and then, going out to eat with the crew after the mission or after the simulation, or now you're on what we call travel, temporary duty, TDY. And I had a budget, so I would have a per diem every day of money that you either kept or spent, so you could go to these amazing restaurants. It really wasn't until then that I ate out significantly, and that's also, by the way, when my weight problems started happening. But back to cooking, my mother and both of my grandmothers loved to cook, and I can remember very distinctly, I still have it in fact, getting a cookbook, and I'm going to say this is around the early 80s, but it was Jeff Smith's Frugal Gourmet it was either a birthday or Christmas. And so I would have been either a senior in high school, or I was a freshman in college. I don't know, but it was about that time. And I was thrilled to get a cookbook. So a lot of those meals, I grew up with this influence of cooking.
I admire that so much. I think that's amazing. I have envy for you being able to be brought up around food so closely. And, that's just beautiful to really have a true appreciation from the ground through to the mouth and everything in between.
What was your food world like?
I had a completely opposite experience, and that's why I have so much envy, because, I grew up in Los Angeles, city girl, total city girl. And my mom, I love you, Mom, but I always give her a hard time because, you know, my kitchen was very empty. We still joke. Now my children go to their house, and my daughter Maya is always like, "Oh my gosh, Grandma, there's nothing in her house that's not expired." You know, we find the challenge is how old can you find something in the kitchen? You know, 5-year expired pasta, 10-year expired canned beans. It's kind of a joke, but it's not funny.
So it was an eating out culture.
Well, it was an eating out culture, and my mom would, you know, if she was going to make a dinner or if she was going to make a holiday, because again, I love this time of year. I love the holidays because for me, it really represented a time where we were all together, just my family getting together. I don't have a big family, and I didn't have a big family locally growing up. So when my mom was going to make a meal, it would be a big stressful event, and she would spend a lot of time collecting the recipes and going, it's a whole day to go shopping, and don't mess with Mom. She's really stressed out. And she never taught me how to cook because she wasn't really cooking, you know, innately. She was following a recipe. And
I think that's pretty common. I mean, it's not, it's probably pretty common that people aren't cooking.
It's all too common. And, you know, because of that, when I went plant-based, I had to teach myself from scratch. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to throw a little of this and a little of that. Like I love watching you and your mom do. It's so exciting and it's fun. And for me, it was intimidating, and I'm still intimidated in the kitchen. And, you know, I'm a dietitian who everyone thinks I'm automatically a chef, but I've never had culinary education. I had a nutrition education. So I had to teach myself from scratch.
This is health meets food, not food meets pan.
No, exactly. So I grew up mostly, we would go out, and more so as my father's business, you know, got more successful. He worked for the government, and then he started his own practice. And so eventually, you know, 80s and 90s, we started going out to eat. And I have a whole sense of history and tradition of different restaurants that we would go out to. And so we'd even have holidays out sometimes. So, you know, I was raised in a completely different environment.
What about your maternal and paternal grandparents?
So where I lived in LA, we had my grandma Yetta. My grandma raised my mom, but she lost her husband when my mom was 9 months old. So she worked full time. And my mom's grandma, my great grandmother, raised my mom, and I never even met her because she died before I was born. But my grandma Yetta, she was this little tiny little thing. She was so cute with pink hair. And she lived near us and in a little apartment building. But she always, you know, I loved going to my grandma's house. She always made sure she had the things that I loved, you know, like Swiss mocha coffee, the instant coffee. She would let me have coffee with milk, you know, that was like so rebellious when I was younger. And she would always have cookies, Fig Newtons, and she would make me this banana bread with chocolate frosting. And there was like this apple chicken recipe she made. But she would always make the same things that she knew we loved. But again, it was kind of like a big deal, and it was like one little thing. And she was not a big eater. Like she was one of those few people in the world that eat to live. Unlike us, we kind of live to eat, really. We love to eat. It is true. And there's very few people that I know in my life that are like my grandma, but she did it to make us happy, and we would love to sleep over. And then on my other side, my grandparents on my dad's side, my dad's from New York. So he's a New Yorker, you know, like he's a big time New Yorker. And my grandfather drove a yellow taxi cab, you know, forever. That was his career. And it's so cute to think about now. And I can't believe they're all gone. But my grandma, Sally, you know, New Yorker, and Jewish New Yorker who loved food. She lived to eat too. And, you know, but I didn't like the kind of food she made. Like it was very traditional, kind of like the not healthy Jewish deli kind of side of stuff. You know, like I remember we have so many diet stories. I'll go on and on about Grandma Sally later, but didn't teach me how to cook. It wasn't, you know, I remember sneaking candy and all those kind of like things, but I also didn't see them that often because they live in New York, and then they lived in Florida at the end of their lives. But so I was not raised around the culture of cooking or growing food at all. And
this makes a big difference. And you know, so to answer your question, or to go back to your question of, you know, the idea of one, you know, mischaracterizing me as, you know, never eating and always being cold. I love to cook. And as you know, some of my meals are very simple and repetitive. I have a whole list of meals that are really simple, but I would say every week I always do something that's more decadent and gourmet-ish. You know, it's not necessarily that it's off the health scale. You know, if the scale, if healthy, if 0 or 1 or 2 is unhealthy and 10 is perfect, you know, it may be 6 or 7, but it's not a 1 or 2 every week. And eating out for me has been something that I enjoy doing, but I really like the idea of eating at home. I really like the idea of cooking now. And I think my favorite meals are the ones when I clean the fridge or pantry. I mean, you know,
you do such a good job with that.
once you have a general idea of what you like in terms of spices and herbs or sauces and dressings, that's the most fun. And they're the best meals. It's like a challenge.
It's a challenge, like those cooking shows where they're like, here are some peanuts and some Rice Krispies, make something, you know, and you're really good at that. And I mean, I think I am too. It's a good challenge. It's like you have to get creative and you're hungry and you've got this great incentive. And some of the best recipes come out of those situations, I think.
Right. And I guess when I look at this, I didn't address the holidays per se, but I think the point to remember is that nearly all the festive foods are pretty much side dishes, just sides. Sure, there may be the slab of ham or turkey or whatever. And I've really never liked turkey by itself. I always wanted to put something on it.
Meat is a delivery system for sauce.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so it was always gravy or cranberry or eat it with the stuffing,
Mashed
a bite
potatoes.
of stuffing.
Most people say
so in other
that,
words,
yeah.
most of the things around Thanksgiving, since that's the holiday that's imminent, most of those side dishes are fine. And okay, again, they might be a 6 or 7. It may not be the best food, but most of those side dishes are fine. But if we think about it, you know, from Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, you can sort of dress Hanukkah, but from Halloween to New Year's Eve, it's pretty easy to create decadent, healthy side dishes. I mean, it's not that difficult, and there's no limit. The herbs, thyme, rosemary, and sage are the herbs of Thanksgiving. Like, that's the smell, that's the flavor. It's easy to create those kinds of recipes once you know what they are. And so, having grown up around cooking and loving to cook, I would far rather cook a meal than go out and eat a meal. And I know that there are people out there probably listening right now that think, you know, okay, I don't have time, or, you know, how do you do this? And the answer is you actually do. And this would be the same excuse that a whole another group of people might say with, you know, going to the gym. You don't have time to go to the gym, or you don't have time to study for the test, or you don't have time to prepare for the presentation, or you do have time. And in terms of taking that little bit of time in your life to learn how to prepare the basic meals, and even if you just do that, even if those basic meals that I told you I have several times a week, even if you just prepare those and decrease your eating out frequency, is something that will help in the long run. But with the holidays, it's certainly something to think about in terms of how these can sabotage you. And I know things have changed a little bit even since we've started coaching people, but how do you deal with that sabotage? Because I know that you've probably seen this unintentional sabotage a little differently, or we've talked about it differently since we've met. So how do you see how the holidays and how others might sabotage you when you're actually trying to stay on a program or stay true to eating in a certain way?
So while I celebrate all of the wonderful parts of the holidays, I know I can empathize that it can be stressful for a lot of reasons. And this is one of them. You know, as a personal trainer first, and then when I became a dietitian, and then, oh my goodness, I became a plant-based dietitian, I always became like a trigger. I guess people say the word trigger, but like I always was like, everyone was uncomfortable eating with me. And everyone had to like interrogate me at every meal, even though I did my best to avoid it. I don't want to talk about food. We don't need to make my Thanksgiving choices a discussion for the table. I don't need to discuss it with people. And, and I can relate to so many people that deal with this, where they're, especially if they're going through a transformation and they haven't done this for a while. Even, I mean, again, this is how many years have I been? 15 years. It'll be my 15th Thanksgiving eating plant-based. Even after all that, I still get stressed out when I'm around people, because everyone's got, a litany of cross-examination questions that they give me still to this day. So my best advice is, when I get sucked into it, it feels really yucky. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want others to feel like that. I don't want it to be that conversation during something that should be more positive, and people get sucked into this with, like you said, politics, religion, all this stuff that seems to somehow always come to the front and center at a holiday meal, whether or not you want it or not, is to try to avoid it. Just, I'll try to either shut down the conversation, like just switch the conversation, change the conversation, laugh it off, tell a joke. I used to, when I would write my column, I would say, I used to have like this list of responses to, where do I get my calcium? Where do you get your protein? Where do you, like all the standard questions? Because there is a list that most people, and really still to this day.
And wouldn't you say that most people ask those questions because they want to have the debate, not because they really want an answer?
Well, right. They want to have the debate and they don't want to have an answer. They have their own answer. And they don't necessarily want the answer. So I think the best advice is either just stave it off, change the subject. If you make light of it, that's good too. But the other thing you can do is just say, you know what, that's a good question. I'll get back to you, and then give them that space to decide if that's really what they want to, if they really want to pursue the answers.
Right. So one thing we could do, one good idea, I'm just thinking extemporaneously here, but the idea of saying, I'll tell you what, it's kind of detailed what I've been doing. So if you'll email me, or if you'll call me, or if you want to come over in a week or so, or let's pick some time, and then let's just focus on that, and I'll explain it all. Because otherwise we'll get all into the details here, and most people here probably don't care. But give them that, the out, but then let them know that because I think the fear that many people have is that you start doing this, you start feeling better, you start getting good results, and then you're worried about sometimes the people around you, and then they actually get motivated by you, and you don't want to, it may sound like you're pushing them away, but getting back to what you said about being a lighthouse, not a tugboat, what we're able then to do is say, look, I'm acknowledging you. I'm acknowledging, because sometimes they may be asking because they're worried about you.
Right.
And so you're acknowledging that. And sometimes they truly might be curious, and sometimes they just want to debate and put you down. But the great thing is that if you say, hey, email me or call me or text me or let's get back together, that sort of puts it off from this time period. And then it also invites them openly to get back to you when it's just the two of you. And if they take the time to text or email or to come over, then they ought to be open to what you have to say. That doesn't mean you're going to convince them or that you even need to convince them.
And I think it might be a detriment to yourself too, because that's where the sabotage comes in, wherein you try to answer the question. Say you're just trying to help and you're trying to answer the question, and they have a different idea about it. And then you start questioning yourself, whether or not this happens right away or later. But in your brain, there's this little seed that was planted, this doubt. Well, maybe I am not getting my calcium. I should look into that. All those questions that you don't need to go down. You've already done your homework. You've already done your research. You've already made your decisions. So this is where some of that can lead to sabotage. So whether or not they are interested in having answers, and, we have peer-reviewed medical journal articles that we could share. And by the way, people still challenge me on stuff that we've published.
Well, and it's okay from a science perspective to be challenged, but the fact of the matter is these people are challenging and they haven't really given a lot of thought.
Exactly.
They read a blog here and then immediately they've got the answer on something. And I believe that, back to this idea of sabotage, like for example, we're not beyond it ourselves. So we unintentionally sabotage one another. And in the idea that, say, for whatever reason, we want to not go out to eat so often, or like, for me, up until really about 2 or 3 years ago, sodium never caused any issue. My blood pressure really post plant-based diet, certainly post fasts, has always run 100, 110 over 67,
Normal,
68.
just
That's what it's
normal,
supposed to be. And that one time in New York City, when
Mhm.
it just shot up to 140 or 130 over, it was a big
It
number.
was
It was
high.
90 or something. It was not a good thing.
Because we'd gone to plant-based restaurants every day. We were on this mission to
Salt.
eat our way through
so
New York
sodium
City.
affects me now in a way it doesn't. And we've talked about this. And so a lot of times I'll want to avoid that salt surge, just where I just don't feel good. My mouth is just like, I go out to eat, or we've done this even recently.
We
You go
just
out
did
to
it the
eat,
other night.
and then for the next 2 days, I feel
Ugh.
like I had a salt lick from our
Yeah.
pasture, that I went after.
Aw.
And so I'll want to do this. And so, talk about the unintentional sabotage that we do with one another, because it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no malice. Obviously, we care about each other, and but it's fun. Like, it's tradition again. When I land in Nashville, there's some of my favorite restaurants.
And
are in
I didn't
Nashville.
make a cultural connection until just now, which is, you do love going out to eat.
Yes, because
But
I was
that
raised.
is part of how you were raised.
Yes.
And I love going out to eat too, because it was a special occasion.
But that said, I never had someone who would whip me up a meal that they know I'm gonna love the way you do. So
Right.
it's kind of interesting.
So it's real fun, because when we think about this, and I would imagine this dynamic happens with lots of people, where maybe both people or your friends that you're with are those kinds of friends that have always migrated to eating out, and that's what they think is socially normal, and it is for them. And this gets back to what I said the very first time. When you're trying to make a change, a lot of times what you're doing goes against what was socially normal, and you're not doing it to prove they're wrong.
This was what my TEDx talk was about. It was about food is so deep. It is about culture and love. I mean, food is love. Food is relationship. Food is tradition. It's really important.
Yeah, so I think what ends up happening here is that we migrate to this normal that is a part of what we were used to as we were being brought up, or what was socially normal before we made these changes. Many people listening to us, whether you're, as you say, plant curious, or you have made a transition to a plant-based diet, you probably weren't raised that way.
No.
I would say the vast majority of people weren't raised that
No.
way, and they came to it the way we did. And so it's okay that what we're doing is different. It's not difficult from a sabotage perspective. You don't need to change what you're doing just to fit in. It's not necessary. You don't have to change them. You don't have to teach them. You don't have to lecture them.
No, because again, I'm going to tell all of you that are listening right now, this is your body and your decision, and you get to decide what you swallow. And that's empowering. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to do something for someone else. All that matters is how you feel about your decision, and you get to choose that in every bite. And, back to being a lighthouse, not a tugboat, Raymond, you started this plant-based diet 10 years ago, the week of Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving. So, I mean,
You've been looking
wow.
at my Instagram or my Twitter or my Facebook.
Yes.
I've actually published the page I put a picture of the page in the notebook. Yeah, November 23rd, 2009. I was at TEDMed 2009 and met both David Sinclair. We have a interview scheduled for David this week, so
Can't
you guys have
wait.
that one coming up.
So
But I
excited.
had David Sinclair, and then also had the conversation with Dean Ornish. And I know I've told the story before, but I lost my weight. And after I lost my weight, my glucose control and everything got worse, not better. And so I was struggling with that. And the last three things I gave up was fish, eggs, and
Yogurt and cottage
cheese for my body for life. Bill Phillips fans out there, that was the small 6 frequent meals that I was doing. Anyway, that translated over to Dean asking me about dropping those for a little while. And so I made the decision, and that would have been around Halloween. We were at TEDMed around the 27th, 28th of October. And then I had a week or two that I ordered some books. I got a couple of different books, and then I started on the 23rd with that list of vegetables that you'll see. If you go look at my Instagram, you'll see the post. I started with that, and it was like, I don't know, $51.91 or something worth of stuff, to 21.5 pounds of vegetables and fruits. And even
But
though
who's counting?
even though I grew up eating vegetables and fruits, it was actually a pretty difficult thing. But back to the question you asked about waiting and when to start and holidays, if you're going to make a change or a transition, I say don't wait. I say in the
Be bold.
30 to 42 days or so, or whatever, while this holiday season is among us, I would say go ahead and try to use the time off or the time that you have other crazy things to do. And I would say eat as on plan as you possibly can. Certainly, if you've made a decision to lose, I would just start now, because when you start with everybody in January, you get sucked in like trucks drafting on the highway, or like NASCAR is drafting one another, and you start diet when everybody's starting diet, and you go to the gym when everybody's going to the gym, and then everybody fades off and you fade off, and then, 6 months from now, you're still talking about the 15 or 20 pounds you lost back in January that you long since have gained back, and you haven't really made the progress, or you've drifted off your diet if it's not about weight loss, because sometimes it's about health and other things. I would say start now. And certainly, getting back to what I was saying, those office gatherings, those things where the food is average, start by eliminating those things. Start by using the idea of what you're saying about mindful eating. And if it's just some average thing and people are just swallowing for the hell of it, like, that's not the time to do it. That's not rare and appropriate, And so I think that it becomes a really good idea for us to consider how we can make those changes. And for right now, if you are doing plant-based, reconnect right now. Reconnect over the holidays and do all of these meals on plan, because these are all side dishes that you can prepare.
I like your idea, and I like that we do this with our clients too. I think this is a perfect opportunity to pick one meal that is a gathering that would be really uncomfortable. Pick one meal, go into it fed, like have a meal before you go to this meal. Show up and don't eat and watch what happens, and just take it in. Make that another mindful exercise. Watch what people say, how they respond to you not eating. It is extraordinary and mind-blowing how people will respond, but it's a really helpful exercise.
And this is a good time of year to do that.
Exactly.
Because there's so many different eating events that sometimes, let's face it, you're going from one to the other to the next. I can't even imagine some of these people going from party to party to party, if they're celebrities, or if they're the CEO or regional manager, and they're going to all the different offices, and it's that festive time of year for very, very large corporations. But this is a really good plan. And once you see how people react,
mind-blowing.
And even when it's something simple, like you said, I had another commitment, or I already ate, or I already had something to eat. It's just amazing to see what people do when you just show up and you don't eat. And also, it's amazing how you feel.
Yeah.
To really stop and think about it. I'm sitting around, everybody has this plate full of stuff, average stuff mostly, and I'm not eating, I'm not drinking, I'm just sort of watching what's going on, just as a learning exercise. Not that you have to do this all the time.
No, but you will have some temptation, and you will have a lot of shock about what goes on when you're not participating in it. And the cool thing is, when it's over and everyone's kind of done and the plates are empty, and you're kind of looking around, you think, wow, I just got through a meal where it was tempting, because there was always going to be some kind of temptation, and you were fine, and you were just fine.
Everything was fine.
It's a good exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but for those times when you actually want to bring something, we have something for you. And
yes, we do.
we put together 4 or so recipes from the book that are things that we love, and I'm not going to tell them what they are.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell them what they are, because I want them to discover. But one of them is sort of a party favor kind of recipe that they could actually have and would be great. You could bring to any kind of gathering, and people would
They'll be
not
impressed.
really recognize that it's in any way connected to some kind of diet or something special. It would just be stuff that we fix all the time. Another one is a variation. I would say it's gourmet-ish because
It's
of the ingredients.
fancy.
It's fancy, but it's easy. It's
Easy,
very
but
easy to make, but it's fancy. It's got a lot of ingredients, but it's easy. And it's very related to something else. This is going to be hard to talk about. It's very easy. It's very related to something else that we eat commonly. It's a different topping, but it's something that would be really fun to bring and perfectly on plan in terms of eating a healthspan diet. One of them, the other two are just traditional sides that would go during Thanksgiving or
Any time of the
Christmas or
year. We
any
love
of those
these.
times. These would be just sides. And so
Staples.
I'm going to put up a link on healthspansolution.com. So go to the website and go to the podcast page. If you look on that page, we'll put a button that will have a download for a PDF, and you can download that. And these 4 recipes will be in the book. In fact, we just got a notification that the book has been printed.
So excited.
And we're supposed to get one like
Any
any
second
day
now.
now, which is really great.
Yes.
It comes out in
2.5 weeks.
Yeah,
December
2.5 weeks,
17th.
December 17th.
Right
So
around the
we
corner.
need everyone, if you haven't ordered yet, we want to ask you, please take that time to order now. If you want to give one away for a gift,
It's
you-
perfect timing.
you
It's
can
a
look.
week before
In fact, go
Christmas.
up on Amazon now. They've put a couple sample pages, so there's some recipes or some other things are there, so you get an idea what it's like. Now is a really good time for us because it's so close. It's almost there.
Yeah, we're really
it's
excited. We
Really
can't
almost
wait.
done. So that's going to be it for today.
I want to wish everyone a very happy, healthy Thanksgiving,
Enjoy that food.
every single bite, and thank you for joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food. So remember, keep
eating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.
Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. Couldn't get better, should have been much worse. Welcome to the last road on the right of your life. Was paved with good intentions, hoping this is not all that you wrote. All that you wrote.